Thanks for coming around.
Mate,
How you
thank
doing?
you for having me. I'm good. It's been a busy time, but mate, just enjoying being in Australia, and we're lucky to live here. It's a good place.
Now you've opened the batting with that, so let's because people, this podcast we're running 10 years. People listen to old episodes, and
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like, I've got to remember that's right. So we're recording this on the 17th of April.
Yes.
And on the weekend,
Yeah.
there was a horrific mass murder at Bondi Junction, where a bloke with a very large knife killed a lot of people. And then last night there was something online streaming, church service. There was a kid, 15-year-old kid.
Sad.
And on Saturday night, Audrey and I were talking about, I lived in the States for 10 years.
Mate.
I was like, fuck.
Scary.
Hell. And my brother and his husband, they live in Detroit.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, I'm just so grateful that we, A, have public health care.
Yep.
And B, just don't have access to guns.
Mate, I think I had 2 years in Philly, 2 years in New York. And it's a constant source of stress, is that knowing that there's threats around, and they have a lot of issues in the US, and we just don't have them here because of various reasons about how our countries have kind of developed, but we're lucky here.
We are amazingly lucky, and as much as I disagree with pretty nearly everything that the Howard government did to take guns off the street, to put it up, debate it, pass it, and get it done. I think 20 weeks or something like that. They did it.
He seized the moment, and
that is.
I think the rates for gun violence dropped dramatically. Suicide, everything about it was handy.
To go against his base. And there's that famous photo. Somehow the press photographer got behind him, and you could see he's wearing a vest.
The vest,
under a suit that wasn't tailored for a vest.
Took a lot of courage to do that, to go against it. Yeah.
But could clearly see what could happen. And I'm sure you've had conversations when you were in the States.
Yeah.
The reasoning is like, well, I need a gun because he's got a gun. And because he's got a gun, I need another gun.
There's holes all through it, isn't there? And it's just, I remember I was there during the Sandy Hook.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was there, I was in Philly, but I remember that debate happening. I'm like, if they're not able to change things after this, there won't be a change.
It's, I left in 2015. And Audrey and I were talking about this on Saturday night. Like, they pretty much doesn't make the news if it's less than 5 people.
No. That's the thing. I know this weekend was a big deal in Australia. It's terrible what happened. It's also telling this stuff rarely happens in Australia. It very rarely happens. So we are lucky.
How were you on Saturday as someone who has, part of the job of the military is, hey, I get to live my life where I watch Blue with my kid and cry, when the for sale sign is there. And I know I get to do that because I contribute to a pool of money that pays people like you to get trained incredibly well to go, and the rubber meets the road on my country's diplomacy when people like you go out and do the thing, so I don't have to.
Yeah, it was. I always get that a bit of a shock, obviously, when something like that happens. But I go through, especially in shopping centres, I go through there. I'm always waiting for it. I shouldn't, but I go to shopping centres. I'm going, this is a place where, if you meant harm, you would come here and you could get a lot of people easily. So for me, I've always got that in the back of my head. But that seems like a really random, isolated incident, someone with those issues that would do that. So, hopefully it's very rare and stays like that.
Because I was really unprepared on Saturday night. I was at dinner with Audrey, went to go out, and it's less than 1.5 Ks from here.
It's close, yeah.
We were there an hour before Georgia and Audrey left after we did, me and Wolfie. So we were there 2 hours before. Audrey and Georgia were there an hour before, right where it all went down. And that night, it's been, 20 years since I got diagnosed with PTSD, but
really?
I was like, oh, shit, here we are. Oh, man.
Yes.
It's, okay.
A response to it.
And I'm trying to talk to Audrey over dinner, and I think she must have, I stopped counting at 12. She asked me 12 times, where are you?
Oh, really?
because I was doing these ones.
Rattled by, yeah. Yeah, it's true, man. I had the same thing happen when what was the incident in Martin Place?
Oh my gosh, yes.
That
Yeah.
rattled me because of the whole connection with, terrorism, basically.
Yeah,
Even though
yeah,
he was
yeah.
acting alone, I just remember thinking, it's come home. All this stuff we've done overseas, here it is. And that was this is our safe space, and it shouldn't, but just how terrifying it is when it comes here. It's really bad. And that's kind of where I got this whole idea for the fiction pieces. I'm like, what happened if it would, if war did visit us home after all the things we've done overseas, wouldn't be pleasant.
I do want, that's what we're here. I do want to talk to you about that. But how do you, someone who's, seen so much combat and seen so much violence, how do you manage? Like, what are the processes you go through when something like the Link Cafe thing happens or something like this weekend happens?
So when you first do training in the military, you get kind of your basic training, you build up, and you get your skills built up to a point where all your kind of neural pathways are built in to be able to fight quickly when you need to. So that part of it gets done well by the military. There's another part that is difficult to prepare for, and that's the kind of trauma of it. If you've seen someone wounded or killed or a civilian hurt, all the human side of it is hard to prepare for. And the first time I witnessed that sort of thing I was 21. I was in East Timor. I saw a lot of civilians coming back in terrible shape. And again, I think the next time where I really saw things like that was in Afghanistan on my first trip. And so we were highly trained to fight, but we weren't as well equipped, and I wasn't as mature to deal with injuries, death, mates getting hurt, and also the kind of moral injury of you've been told your whole life not to inflict harm, to look after people, and then you're doing it as part of your job, and just that creates a bit of a fault line, I think, through a lot of people. But to your question though, how did I deal with it? When I first came home from those early deployments, I had unusual symptoms that were classic PTSD symptoms, which was, I couldn't concentrate, I was socially withdrawn, couldn't sleep. So, and I was like, something's wrong here. So I went and saw the Army neuroscientists that had seen a lot of combat soldiers, and the guy just explained the science of it to me. He goes, mate, you're not crazy. This is just a response to trauma. This is how you deal with it. And just kept it fact-based. And I was like, thank God for you, because I'd be in a hole if it was, if it wasn't for you, I'd still be thinking I'm crazy. Yeah.
It can really get like that. If you don't know what's happening. Like, first time I had an anxiety attack, I thought I was going to die. I thought I was having a heart attack. I called the ambulance. No, I was just having, and the ambos were really kind of like, before we go to the hospital, let's just take a couple breaths here, mate. I was 18.
Yeah, right.
My mum worked as a civilian doctor for the Australian Army in Yeronga. It's not there anymore.
Yeah, right.
1 Mil Hospital in Yeronga.
Wow.
So 15 years she was there.
Wow.
And so I'm not only the kid of two doctors, I'm a kid of this woman that, worked as a civvy. And I was on base all the time because, she's like, oh, my shift's finishing late. I can nip out and, pick you up from whatever, and then you're going to have to come back here because, then I'm going to be at home. And so I was around it a lot, and I think it was a Vietnam era thing that was built. And I can't imagine how different things, the way that neuroscientists spoke to you, I can't imagine how different things are now compared to what people were dealing with in the mid-'80s when she started there.
Yes. I think PTSD was only introduced formally into the Guide for Psychology in the mid-'80s after they'd studied these Vietnam veterans. They just couldn't figure out what it was that was doing it, and they called it soldier's heart in the Civil War, shell shock in World War I. It's changed. It's always been there. It's just changed names over time. But they now have the science on it, and they recognise what it does to people's minds, and also that you can totally come back from it. It's just a matter of looking after yourself and getting treated, and then it's no dramas.
The stuff that it's terrible, yet war is responsible for some of the most extraordinary technological advances.
Yes, it is.
And some of the most profound medical advances, because who's going to get the ethical go-ahead for a study on, okay, we're going to show you a bunch of your friends dying, and then we're going to figure out how you're not going to get traumatized by it. Go. No one university is ever going to green like that yet. Okay, like I read about one. It's like, what if we just kept Game Boys in the Humvee, all right? And then the moment, if something really bad's happened, we pull them out, we get them to play Tetris all the way home.
Yeah, right.
Apparently something about
no way
being in that space in the first 20 minutes after something terrible going down. Like it was something along those lines. Like no one's ever going to be able to do that research, but it kind of opens the door to what else is going on here, how the memory's getting written, how things, our responses get hardwired. And awareness is super important. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to have done your job and like you said, like just go to the shopping center, go to Wet and Wild.
Yeah, you're not ready. You're just like the transition is not right because the neuroscientist explained it to me. He goes, you've been overusing your amygdala, your ancient part of your brain controls all your fight and flight mechanisms. He goes, you've been using that to survive, and that kind of makes you more reptilian than a person at the moment. All the things that make us human in your prefrontal cortex, empathy and logic and reasoning, he goes, you bench that for a while. So when he explained it to me like that, I'm like, okay, makes a bit of sense now.
And once you learn and become aware of like, oh, I can feel my heart here. I don't normally feel that.
Yep.
I think I just shouted the last three things I said. I don't know what's going on here.
Exactly.
I'm just going to go take some breaths, guys. I'll be right back.
Glass of water.
well, yeah, that's another one. Just splash a bit of water on your face, just something sensory. Because if you don't know what's happening, just being aware of it is really something. Do you find yourself like as you go through life, as any dad, fears for their children.
Mate.
That old line of like, the moment you have a kid, your heart now exists outside of your body.
It's true. It's true, literally.
How do you manage that with the evidence around you that you live in a very, relatively safe country?
Yeah, it's hard because I'm like, you've got to preserve their wonder of the world that they're seeing it for the first time, and you don't want to impose your kind of lens that you might have got at one point in life because of something unusual. You don't want to impose that over them. You want it to be special and exciting and new. But you've always just got in the back of your mind, like when they're a bit older, it's something I can teach them about the world. Is like, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are some bad people or some bad things out there. Just look out for it.
Yeah.
And it can help them.
It is, it's such a balance, isn't it? Because I'm listening to this book from Jonathan Haidt at the moment. He's an amazing guy.
Is that the one? Yeah, I know.
Social psychologist at Stern.
Yes,
he wrote
kids.
He wrote The Coddling of the American Mind. It's freaking amazing.
Yeah.
And he was one all about cancel culture. And this one is basically, well, what was the cause of that? And it's called The Anxious Mind, which is basically how the rise of smartphones changed how people's brains wire. And hence, we're in this wild space. And so I'm just, I knew a bit of it, but learning more and more about kids, it's really kind of vital that they're exposed to danger.
Yes.
And they are trusted to be out of the house without you.
Yep.
As difficult as it is, they're going to be struggling as adults if they don't have that.
Yes.
Like for me, it's hard. I can't imagine what it's like for you.
Yeah. Yeah. If that whole building kind of risk assessment into them when they're young and they're not going to get hurt too badly, it's important. You've got to let them go out and fall off the monkey bars every now and then and be okay with it, even if you're not around.
How do you do that when you're speaking to a little person?
Well, Harry will do things like I'll see him climbing up a cage that's on a concrete basketball court, and I'll be like, mate, if you fall off that, you're going to land on concrete, so just be really careful. And I'll tell him that, and he'll be like, okay, but I'll stand sometimes close enough to catch him, but I'll just tell him about the danger so he knows and then let him go on his way.
Yeah.
And you just hope he doesn't fall.
Were you the kind of kid that had a visit to the plaster caster when you were a little man?
Mate, we used to head off in the mornings and we had so much bush around our place in Perth and we'd just be off on the bikes all day exploring.
Yeah.
And you'd come home late in the afternoon. There was no mobile phones. No one knew where you were. They just hoped that you were doing the right thing. And I think giving that independence to kids is good. Yeah.
I'm very much the same.
Yeah.
I think I was 8 the Christmas I turned I think 7. Yeah. So 8. I was just about 8 when I got a BMX. And it was, all right, when the street lights come on,
back home.
your kids are home, which is also good because that's when Monkey Magic and Doctor Who started. So it was like,
two classics.
We need to get home again. And that was it. We just go for wherever, doing all kinds of wild shit.
Yep.
And I don't know how scary it was for my mum at the time, but we're okay. I think my brother still got some gravel in his knee.
We survived. It's funny how we survived, wasn't it?
But, I wonder if we're going to see a pendulum swing back.
I think so. They're already starting to do it with playgrounds, and they realised they over-safetied up playgrounds, and now they're bringing back rocks and trees and all these things that I want kids to play on or fall off and, give them a bump or a scrape, and it's good, it's character building.
It's so fascinating when you're talking about brain development. If you're an EST or at 21, your prefrontal cortex hasn't even finished building yet.
No. And it was clear because I'd still do stupid things. And
so that's your impulse control and things like that.
Impulse control.
Figuring stuff out.
Judgment and risk assessment. And that's why car insurance premiums are very high until you're 25 years old because insurance companies figured this out, that especially young men, risk takers.
Yeah.
And that's why, young men get hurt a lot because to attract a mate sometimes they have to take risks, or they think they have to take risks, and it can lead to harm.
You're not a small man. I put you on the lower chair, so don't be fooled. Like Mark's head and shoulders above me. Were you a big person when you were a teenager?
Our family was all pretty solid. My mum was like 6 foot tall, kind of battle axe ish, pretty strong.
You can't call your mum a battle axe?
No, she was tough. Dad was like, you got your mother's brawn and your father's brains.
Nice one, Dad.
But the whole family are pretty solid, I guess. So growing up, we're pretty. We used to eat them out of house and home.
Well, I think that's also that's it. But I'm asking this because this is when you're the big guy, people kind of sometimes want to prove themselves.
Oh yeah. I used to get picked on a bit from the older kids when I was young.
Yeah. So
I'd be like grade 8 or whatever. There might be some year 10s that want to knock you into line a bit, So got my hard start at high school.
All right. And at what point did something like the military thing show up as like, you know what, I want to go do that? And what was behind it?
I think I was in grade 9 and I'd already was attracted to military things. I could watch Tour of Duty and all these old shows that were on TV. But then when I was in grade 9, this kid showed me, he was like a military fan, but he showed me all these photos of the Iranian embassy siege in London.
Oh, wow, yeah.
In 1980. I'm looking at all these guys doing hostage rescue and I was like, that would be a cool job. Did some homework on it, found out it was the SAS, and they're actually a military unit. They're not a police unit or anything. So I thought that's what I want to do, trying to get there.
That's a very interesting one of Prince Philip's more interesting quotes at the back end of that when he was debriefing them.
Oh, what did he say? I can imagine.
Yeah, I think he was a bit Trumpian. It was something along. Yeah, it was something along the lines of like, I can't believe you don't want to get away. So we would have had to shoot him in the back, sir. I think it was along those lines. It was along those lines.
Okay.
But,
I can imagine that. It's pretty old school,
Yeah. Well, I can only imagine that to get into that division of our military, there's, it's the best of the best. Like, do you start preparing for it? Do you start going, well, I'm going to need to kind of be this and be that? Do you start angling yourself towards that?
Yeah, I think when I found out about it and I'm like, how do you get in? And I read a few books about it. I'm like, this is going to be really hard. And so I started training, I'd run around the school oval and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just doing some training. And then over the years, I got a bit better at it. And But this process took forever to kind of go from a young kid and just train and try and find my way into the army. And when I was in the army, figure out how to go to the unit. The path wasn't exactly clear, but deciding on it from a young age, I think, kept me on the straight and narrow, at least for a bit.
Would you say that, to young men about having a bit of a North Star to head towards when you're about 14, 15? How's that helpful?
Well, I was lucky because I found one. Some people don't, and that's fine. But I think the point is pay attention to those little things that might not be obvious, but they kind of grab you for some reason. Like those photographs grabbed me because it looked exciting, being a team like that, helping people when they're in their worst moment. To me, that really spoke to me and I acted on it. I think some people get those things happen to them that maybe they don't pay attention to it or they don't see it. So yeah, to always be listening for the whisper. Yeah.
Yeah, because it is a whisper.
It's a whisper. It's not a shout.
No.
It's a whisper. Yeah.
No, it isn't. But it's got to be something that you've got to want to do it enough to put yourself through the rigor and the discomfort,
the pain
of getting there.
Yeah, and that's an extreme version of it, but I think with any endeavor that's going to be good and hard to get to and exciting, there's going to be those serious obstacles along the way. So you can get through them if you really want it and you're excited by that goal.
I guess there's a misconception about the SAS. It's kind of a little betrayed by a nickname that I'm pretty sure they were given to them by themselves, the Super Army Soldier.
No doubt. I've heard them prawns. Good body, head full of shit. A few things like that.
But I guess, the idea of like, there's songs about it. The American ones, I'm going to be an Air Force Ranger, all that stuff. So maybe the misconception is that, these guys just want to go and, wreak havoc. But I can only imagine that when you're in those situations that are really intense, you're looking for other guys who think about things in the same way that you are. How many guys would you say were like, well, yeah, I want to do this, but also I'm here because I want to help people when they're having a really bad day?
Yeah. I think almost all the guys I worked with were stable, calm, polite guy. If you met them in the street, you probably wouldn't know. They're decent to everyone, mild-mannered. So most of them were really good and thoughtful too. Like they're not people that just don't reflect on things or think about their lives or what they want to do with them. All of them were decent people, pretty much all of them. So it was a good unit to be a part of because people cared about the outcomes we were achieving and they weren't unnecessarily violent people at all. Yeah.
The only experience I've got with that kind of thing is in the work that I do, I'm often working with security guys who are, ex-military, whether they be the Australian military or the UK military. With the exception of one, they're never as tall as you think they are.
No.
They never have as much muscle on them as you think they do.
No.
They're way smarter than you think. And never once did I ever see any of them throw a punch.
No.
But they have a thing in their eye where they, like,
a little sparkle.
One of them, like, he knew all the nerve endings and things or whatever. And there's this kid at the barrier who's just being a fucking idiot. One day we were doing some live TV and he just kind of
gave him a grab.
He just basically grabbed him by the elbow and he pulled him in close and he just whispered something in his ear. And this kid just went to jelly. Pretty sure he pissed himself and then he left because he was like screaming and hurting, people around him.
Really? Yeah.
I was like, what did you say to him? I said, like, we got a problem? Oh, you don't want us to have a problem. Something like that.
Just the implication.
But there's a thing in his voice
that
clearly said, I am not fucking around.
Yeah. That's what they're like. They're all decent guys. And I'm at the bigger end. Like most guys, weren't my size because there's quite a bit of endurance in there. So a lot of them are kind of a bit short. Like you just wouldn't pick them as Rambo type people.
All the Navy SEALs I met when I was overseas, they were all shorter than me.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'd seen all these movies going, you're a Navy SEAL? You're in Kandahar? What the fuck?
Yeah. You expect someone 10 foot tall and bulletproof and it's totally different.
And the guy who said to me, he's like, mate, I'm in and out of submarines and rubber duckies all the time. Like, those things are tough to live in if you're a really tall person. Like, okay.
It's an embarrassment. It is being tall because you're jammed into helicopters and all sorts,
When you're in the military, you're a visible person in that community. How do things that, quite publicly, when other people who are wearing that badge, who are in that uniform, who maybe aren't acting with the same integrity that you bring to the job, how does that affect you?
I think that was pretty rare. And I didn't see cultural shifts in our unit until we'd been fighting for a really long time. And so I've been there about 6 years, and it was about 2010. And in the last couple of years, I'm like, this is starting to get away from us, because the teams had been deployed constantly since 1999. So nearly 10 years, back-to-back deployments. And in some cases, a lot of fighting. In some cases, a lot of killing, to be frank. And what that does to someone is not, if it happens once, it's bad. If you're doing 5, 6, 7 deployments, it can really warp your view of what's normal. And I was starting to see little pockets of that.
Right. And that must be difficult to get ahead of, because I can imagine there's a justification there of like, I'm keeping us safe. This is the job we came here to
do. That, and also it was becoming incentivized in some ways.
Oh, right.
So think about someone who does get into those positions is given medals for it or whatever.
Mhm.
So that's what people start looking up to, and they start acting in that
Right.
in that manner. But for the longest time, the unit I was in was very much a recon unit. It was involved in strike missions, of course, but it wasn't the core job. But there was definitely a shift. It became the main game, was this targeting, looking for or fighting and killing or capturing these enemy leaders.
Far out.
Yeah.
But I can understand that, like, if that's the gig,
Yeah.
and that needs to happen, because, you know, you don't want to get to Donald Rumsfeld about it, like, I'd do it all again. You don't want to be that.
No.
But you got to understand, like, if there's something on a hard drive in there that's going to save thousands of or tens of thousands of lives, we've got to go.
Yeah. I don't think Australians understood what we were asking our military to do. I don't think we were paying attention, because if they really knew, and the military was really transparent about it, and the journalists had gotten in there and told the story properly, people would have said, well, if we're doing this, it better work. And if it's not going to work, we better change direction immediately. And we didn't do that. So we stayed on this course for a very long time, when we probably should have been changing tack.
It can be, and I'm sure you saw it when you were in America, and I saw it too. People get we should go in there. You know,
this is such a charged topic.
Yeah.
And you can see I'm like walking a tightrope just talking about it.
Yeah.
Because I was on some of these jobs. My mates are involved. They did really hard work. You got to hold both arguments in mind at once. One is that there's potential that there was misconduct on the battlefield. The other one is that these people were put in a bad position for too long.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's culpability on both ends.
I guess that is, yes, that is the tricky thing, though, as we're seeing currently. It's like holding two ideas that are both uncomfortable in your head at the same time is hard to do. Yep. That's why we want what's 8 words that can sum this up and I can move on.
Exactly.
Like, that doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. Like, it's hard.
Yeah.
I guess, you know, where I'm looking towards is that, and it was horrible because somebody's son passed away in an accident in North Queensland a couple of weeks back. But to have our leaders put their kids in the military, they might be less in a hurry to deploy.
No.
Because it seems like a thing that can get your votes, to do this and do that.
Get away from you. Like, once they open the door to it, once you go to another country and start using force, it's just things happen that you can't predict and are out of your control, and it can really get away from you.
So that line, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy, is true.
No. Yes. And if you're going to go to war, you better do it properly or don't go at all.
What does do it properly look like?
Well, in my view, if you're going to fight, it better be for a very strict interest, like Australia is a threat, or our immediate interests are a threat, or someone's been captured and you've got to rescue them. Anything less than that, don't even bother, unless you're going to send everything and everyone.
What about the idea when I first learned radio, one of the greatest things that was told to me is, like, before you open the mic, it's like, know how you're going to get out before you get in. So what's the song you're going to throw to? What's the, later in television, what's the video you're going to throw to? What are we doing here? Oh, we're going to this thing.
Yes.
So I can start this, but then no matter what, I know how I'm going to get out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no one can predict
No.
what's going to happen or how a thing is going to end up.
Nope.
But exit strategies are
Yeah.
difficult things to come up with. Is that why we tend not to have them?
And you might want to get out, but you're caught in a bear trap, basically.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. People get stuck in these conflicts, and there's no easy way out, or there's only bad solutions to get out.
What is it? Like you don't have. I'm just fascinated to know, because I know what I felt when I saw the footage of Kandahar Airport. Those guys are just hanging on the outside of the plane.
Oh yeah,
You know,
that was apocalyptic, wasn't it?
apocalyptic.
Yeah.
That is the word.
Mm.
What is that? As someone who spent a lot of time there and gave a lot of yourself and gave up a lot for the rest of your life, what does that do when you see what happened there in the end?
I had this weird feeling of like I was there every year from 2006 to 2010, and every year they said the same thing. This is the crucial year. This is the one that's going to break the back. This is the strategy. This will win it. They were not only wrong, they were misleading themselves, and our political leaders were as well, and also our journalists were as well, and the soldiers fighting were not facing reality. And so I wasn't surprised when it happened. I was shocked how quick it all unfolded. But until we face up to this, we're going to make the same mistake again. So we, as a country, we lost 41 people. I think there was over nearly 300 wounded. A lot of theirs were killed, soldiers and civilians. And I think we spent $8 billion and we achieved nothing. And that's difficult.
That just Australia alone, the amount of people that rotated through there.
Yeah.
Like that's a lot of people who are
It's a lot of people
living with that.
Yep.
That must be so hard.
Yeah, people died. There were young guys, 20s, 30s, and all right, if it's for something that's really critically important to our country, you can almost absorb those losses in some way. But when it's a waste and it's ineptitude, it's not forgivable.
You've mentioned journalists and political leaders a few times not actually communicating the reality of it.
Yeah.
What can change there? How can we be better at that?
Well, it all goes back to there's always one decision you can make that saves you a million other decisions. And that was the one, the hardest decision we had to make is when we were going to choose to step away from the conflict, despite the fact the US was going to stay there and NATO were going to stay there. And we just didn't make that hard choice when we should have. And it just dragged on and on and on. So we could have gotten out a lot earlier with a decent result, and it still would have been the same outcome. But we didn't. We doubled down. Yeah.
So when it comes to journalists, I can only imagine there's a wider thing at play. People get fed stories. People support different factions. When it comes to actually telling the Australian public the truth, did anyone come close to it?
I feel like I know some people were starting to question it. I think there was a time the Gillard government came into power and there was a helicopter accident. It was when I was there, it was 2010. I think 3 or 4 commandos were killed. Pretty bad, and everyone's going, all right, is this mission still relevant? And I think they had an opportunity to really adjust our approach, and we lost that opportunity. They're like, no, it's a good mission. We're doing the right thing. And I think the military is very good at presenting information that suits them and not unfashionable, difficult information that's going to make life hard for them. So I think that's another mistake. And I think there's people that are in political slots need to know when they're being the lily's being gilded.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can really win votes. They don't call it a khaki election for nothing. People
can. Definitely.
People are afraid.
Yeah.
Like if you make something scary enough, it's like, if you want this, then don't vote for them.
Yeah.
Like what?
And I feel like too, there was debate about it, but was being shut down pretty effectively because people say, well, if you're going to argue against this war, perhaps that means you're not a patriot or you're cowardly. So it's easy to hit people with these labels, right? And that was being used quite a bit. But you've got to have these discussions because they're important.
I think America's got a lot to answer for with the word patriot.
Yeah.
All right? They really do, because I consider myself enormously patriotic. I love this country so much. I became a citizen. I'd do anything for this country. Yeah. If it came to it, I would absolutely. I'm old. I've got a replacement hip. I wear a contact lens. I've got fucked hearing. I would do whatever it took, whatever national service called for it to protect what I love, right? Yeah. And I really disagree with some of the way we do things. Yeah. And I speak up about it if I can, not because I don't love my country, but because I do.
Yes.
And I consider that to be enormously patriotic.
Yes.
The whole you're with us or against us thing, I don't think that's reality.
There is, you're with us or against us, and there's also this middle ground if we need to think about what we're doing. Because if we go down this path, it could be a very difficult path.
Yeah.
So that, it does take courage to have a position like that. I didn't really have that courage when I was in the military. I was in there trying to do the job, trying to make it work. At the same time, towards the end, going, I don't think this is going to work.
What does courage look like for you now?
Well, I think, and it's being able to point out something that is not right, even when a majority of people, it's become convention that it's actually correct, and you don't challenge this thinking. I think it's easy for those things to take hold. It takes a lot of courage to point out that there might be another way of approaching a problem. I don't think I've developed that until much later in my life, until I stopped caring as much about what people thought. It takes that.
It does, though. It does. We're wired for confirmation.
Yeah.
We're wired for
social cooperation.
We're also wired to emulate what looks to be the most popular thing in our cohort.
Yeah.
Oh, they're doing this. I don't want to be excluded, so I'll do this as well.
Yes.
And that is part of our fundamental wiring of what makes us a successful species.
Yeah.
To challenge it is difficult. If you're coming from the same, I guess, ultimately moral place of trying to do the right thing for another human being, it can be hard to communicate that.
Yeah. And also an issue we didn't have until recently is that people's the facts that people are getting are now being distorted. The truth of things is being distorted quite readily with these devices that have all the world's information at your fingertips. So that's becoming a problem. I don't know how we get around that, but that's a big one.
I'm not here to solve it. I'm not here to solve it, but I will agree with you. I read through the timeline of how, like, the wrong kid was identified as the perp on Saturday night.
Yeah.
And just seeing how many, the kind of people that were amplifying it, and, particular Australian news networks not really verifying information before then legitimising it through their publishing of it.
Yep.
Like, that's like smoking a cigarette in a sawmill, man. Yep. Like, it's going to explode.
Yep.
And
gets away from you.
We really need to be careful, and it's only going to get more intense. So being scrutinising information is, I'm sure that's a vital part when you're out in the field, but just as a punter.
Mate, I'm pretty old school. I read newspapers. I don't go too much near, the social media for my news. I try and stick to the journalists. Yeah,
clever
people who are trained as journalists. Try and stick to that.
Pay for it.
It's not perfect, but
no, but you got to pay for it. It's a product like anything else.
You don't pay for it, you're the product.
This is the thing. Without a doubt, if you don't pay for it, you're the product.
Yeah.
Not enough people know that.
No.
Not enough people know that. You not transitioning after life in the military it can be difficult for some people. When you realise, might be time for me to get out of here, when did the next step start to become aware? And do you have, is it like someone, I don't know, people in the NRL, maybe now they're a little more together, but there's a very short shelf life that they're going to be a highly paid player. And after that, it's just MCLs and CTE and, that's it. So, but what do you do next? You got picked out of a squad when you were 11 and you've known nothing but that until you're 28. And then what happens now? Like the story, the story goes quite often. It's like, well, I can just sit on a bar and that's it.
Yeah.
So how is it, was there much help transitioning out? Did you start to have a plan?
There wasn't, there was almost no help transitioning. In fact, it was wielded against me on a couple of occasions. Oh. Yeah. So I was like, well, okay, if you think you're going to transition now, that's going to change your immediate career right now. And I remember just going, after after what you put yourself through and the risks you've taken and the work you've done, they weren't treating discharging soldiers very well at all. And that can be, if there's like this sense of a broken contract, if you take all these risks for your country, there's an unwritten contract with that organisation that will look after you in some way. But in some cases, they just wash their hands of you. That happens to a lot of people who discharge involuntarily. So I was like, well, actually, I'm going to be doing this on my own. So I kind of had my eye on the US. I wanted to go study there. I didn't know what to do for a career after the military, but I'm like, if I go there and study and I have a good time, then that's a good start. And so I applied for business schools in the US and got one, and off I went.
Why business?
Just because I thought I could have another career. I think I was 32 at that point. I was like, I've got enough time to be able to build a career in business and do something fun. But to get in, I might need a bit of training because otherwise I'll lose all my money and probably everyone else's money. And so that's why I went to business school.
It's it's an adaptable skill set coming out of the military. Those Garoni and the guys from Movember, man, it's like he's basically sat around in. He never deployed into Bosnia, but I think he was in Croatia. I think.
Yeah, right.
He was there for I can't remember. He told me when I first started the show. He told me about it. And he goes, yeah. And then after that, I went and started this thing, but because he's got that.
Yeah.
Leadership, chain of command, decision trees, like everything he's got just drilled into him. It's like, man, it's pretty good.
And sometimes you don't have the technical know-how, like finance and accounting, all those things that are technical and you don't necessarily, you've got to learn them. But the soft skills translate well.
Yeah.
Like if you can, plan and execute and be disciplined, all those things are good.
They will get you far in business. And they'll get you far in probably the greatest game ever made, Survivor.
Survivor.
I tried really hard. I did. Oh, I've punished you very briefly about it after a Logies once.
Mate, I do remember that. That was good fun.
I don't look. It's. Did you enjoy doing it? You did it a bunch of times.
I reckon it's the most fun thing because and people get carried away. It's just a bit of fun. It's entertainment. Like I think people take it too seriously when they're in it. But I learned that because I played it once, 2017, kind of cooked it, went back with Sam, my wife, second time, and we had a very different plan about how we wanted to play, and we were much more disciplined and proactive, and and it worked. I was shocked because I was expecting to get booted at some point, but just had a good alliance and ended up having a lot of fun.
I remember that season, the unspoken intel when you were each double-crossing people going, it's okay when she hears me say this because she knows that I don't mean it, and I'm going to and then across to her interview, she's like, it's all right when he says that because I know. It was so good.
It was intense.
It was so good. Look, if I ever get a chance to play it, you're going to be one of the people I call. I'm going to Janine Ellis the shit out of this. I'm going to go.
Call me.
I'm going to Fiji. I'm going to learn how to do all the thing. I'm going to figure it all out beforehand.
Yeah.
When we did, Audrey and I were on, Audrey's Fijian. We spent a bit of time there, and one of the boat boys at the place we were staying once says, "Oh, you work in television?" I'm like, "Do you know Survivor?" What?
Yeah.
No, the Americans get here twice a year. It's like, okay, great. He goes, "Oh, just this last month we had two people who were cast in the next one in the States, 3 months out. All right, they went down.
No way.
Because the island where they shoot it is like right there, and they paid these dudes from the village.
No.
And they said, teach us how to fish, teach us what to do.
Did a recon.
They did. There's $1 million on the line.
Wow.
I'm like, that's the way. That's the way.
It's hard. the islands are difficult. First time I played with Samoa and we just got slammed. It's really tough living. But I think the most important thing with the second time I played is we had a producer from the American season there and they interviewed me and Sam just to prep us for what was coming. And I said, what's the difference between the winners of Survivor and the ones that don't win? She goes, the winners are all in. They go all in on the game. They do everything. They work. I'm like, and it made sense. And I kind of made my mind up. Then I'm like, if I'm going to play, probably going to get smoked at some point. So let's just go all in and have fun.
May as well.
And
yeah, I don't know. I'll talk to you about it afterwards. There's other things that I'm like when I want to play it is when I'm the unassuming kind of guy in my mid-60s. People are like, who's that fucking guy? Didn't he there was an old invention called television, I remember. Wasn't he on it? I don't know.
That's the time to do it.
I'm going to be that guy.
Yeah. Just in the back, just double crossing everyone.
I'm going to Dawn Fraser this shit.
Dawn Fraser.
Oh, yeah, totally. And hopefully keep the strength up so I can.
Shane Gould.
Oh, sorry.
Shane Gould.
I'm going to Shane Gould it. She was amazing.
She was great.
She was so good. At what point, like, there's a line that everyone's got a great book in them. Everyone's got a novel in them. Like I cheated. Like I wrote a memoir. I had the source material.
Yeah, exactly.
I knew it intimately. To go out and say to yourself, I remember someone telling me once, I said, I can't invent a TV show. And he goes, why not? Because I'm not a show creator. And he went, boom, you're now a show creator. I was like, okay.
That's awesome.
The only difference between people who aren't is that one day people said they are.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And then went and did something.
What was it like for you approaching that? Like, I'm going to write a work of fiction.
So I enjoyed writing the nonfiction memoir. And I was like, I'd always thought I could do fiction, but never quite had an idea that I thought was good. And then over time, living up on this hill in Victoria, which is heavily forested and it's a community up there, and I was like, imagine if this was like a holdout in a dystopian future. That could be a really cool story. And the more I thought about it, I was going to do another nonfiction book because, leadership or something, because it's good for a speaking career and you can make money off it.
I think what you meant to say was like, because I really think my country could benefit from some of the skills that I've got, and I've got a lot to say, and I see young men and women struggle in these areas, and I'd really like my kids to grow up in a world led by great leaders. So that's the things I want to put into the world. If I get a speaking gig, I'll take it.
That's what I meant to say. And I was like, but I couldn't, I was looking at it and I'm just not motivated for this. And then I was talking to my editor. I'm going, look, I've got this idea for a fiction book. And it's going to be hard, but this is the idea. And he's like, okay, do a treatment. So I did a proposal and wrote about 10,000 words. He's like, okay, I think this is good. And so I worked on it. It probably took about 18 months. It took me about twice as long as the other book because you're building everything from the ground up. But we edited it 7 times. It wasn't until we got to like the 5th edit that it started to look like a book and a good story. I think before then it was pretty average, but it's really gotten into good shape now, so I'm hopeful.
There's a lot of I did not understand before I started exploring what screenwriting was and starting to learn all that kind of stuff. The thing that you see on screen or the thing that you read in a book, on screen sometimes it's the 80th version of it. Like,
exactly.
And 7's probably low, because people are like, but that's all the difference. Like if you're able to just put one extra hook in there, that's the difference between a bestseller and a blockbuster.
Yeah. And just the cutting out the boring bits. So the pacing is good and I didn't know this when I first started writing, but there are conventions in storytelling and you better know what they are because if all good stories have those conventions, so it pays to know what they are.
Yep. Yeah, mate, you've got no setup for your third act.
Exactly.
There's no point of no return.
Chekhov's gun.
Where's the point?
Point of no return.
Where's your point of no return? It's
Inciting incident.
Like, oh my God, the last fight. Did you watch The Gentleman yet on Netflix?
No, I've heard it's good. Yeah.
I won't say a thing.
All right.
I won't say a thing, but I think Guy Ritchie might have left a few check marks off the story convention list.
There you go. Did it work or no?
I don't want to spoil it for you, but for me, look, you speaking of the motion picture, how did the Mad Max thing come around?
Oh, that was that was really a bizarre one. I had an agent, Kylie, and I just remember saying to her, she's like, "What do you want to do?" I'm like, I've always wanted to do something in film, and I heard they're going to film Furiosa in Australia. It's a Mad Max film. I'd love to try and get some role in it, even if I'm standing in the background holding a toilet brush or whatever. And she goes, just leave it with me. She came back 3 months later. I thought she'd forgotten about. She goes, you can audition for this. I've spoken to the company. And I was like, I've never auditioned for a film. So I got the tapes and it was a monologue and 3 other things, and I had to film it. So I spent about 2 weeks just preparing that, and then I filmed it, did a few takes, and then I packaged it up and sent it to her, and she goes, I'll give it to him. She gave it to him. They said, we'll pass it on to the director. I didn't hear from him. I think I went out on Survivor, actually. And then I came back and she goes, the director wants to chat to you.
You got to meet Dr. George.
And I'm like, what does that mean? She goes, I think it's good. And I didn't want to believe it. I'm like, okay, I'll do this. So I sat on a Zoom interview. It was him and his scriptwriter, Nico Lothorius. And they just told stories for an hour. They're like, this is why we started Mad Max. This is how it happened. And he was just such a curious guy, George Miller. He goes, oh, what's that? And he just pointed at my microphone. I said, I do presentations from home sometimes. And it's a really curious mind, big storyteller. And he goes, well, we've got the main characters picked and we're just building out a constellation of others. And he goes, and we'll have something for you. We'll come back soon. And I was skeptical. I'm like, I don't think this is going to happen. And my agent's going, you're going to get a role, start training. And I was like, I don't think so. And then sure enough, a contract came back and it had a role in the script. And I was like, oh my God, I'm doing this. And so I had to start training for the role. And I think I was on set for about 2 weeks total.
And like how often is your shirt off? Like what kind of training are we talking?
Well, I was worrying this. I'm like, yeah, how much buffness is there going to need to be? I went to wardrobe and I realized I was wearing this huge overall. So it was like arms, neck, back. I'm like, party weights, let's go. So I was just shrug, chest and guns. So yeah, and then went out on the set and it was just like a big military operation. And he as a director was fantastic. Put everyone at ease. I'd never done acting. He's like, don't worry about it. It's just you got to believe you're in it and know what your lines are. And it was a really good experience. I can't wait to see how it turns out.
Thanks for coming around, man.
Mate, thanks.
I really appreciate you coming.
Great to chat.
That was awesome.